April 1945. A small town in southern Germany, name half erased from the maps, half erased from the earth. The artillery had stopped 4 days earlier, but the smoke had not. It rose from collapsed rooftops in slow, tired columns, as if the town itself was still trying to breathe. At the eastern edge of that town, on a narrow dirt road that once carried farmers to market, the United States Army had set up a checkpoint. A wooden barrier. 2 sandbag walls. A weather-beaten American flag tied to a broken lamppost. 20 soldiers. 1 sergeant. 1 corporal. It was just after sunrise. The corporal was kneeling in the mud. In his outstretched hand was something small, something wrapped in brown paper and silver foil. Something that, in that ruined place, in that ruined hour, did not look like food. It looked like a relic. In front of him stood a girl. Maybe 7. Maybe younger. Her coat had no buttons. Her shoes were tied with string. She was not crying. She had passed crying weeks ago. She was simply looking at the corporal's hand, the way a person looks at a door that has been locked their entire life and is suddenly opening. Behind the corporal, 20 American soldiers had gone still. Then the sergeant's voice came across the cold air, low and flat and final. "Arrest him." The corporal did not flinch. He did not argue. He set the chocolate bar gently into the girl's hands, closed her small fingers around it, and stood up. He placed his wrists out in front of him without being told. The girl ran. The soldiers watched. And, in the distance, where the road bent away toward the river, something began to move. Small shapes. Slow. Quiet. Too far to count. None of them noticed. None of them knew that General George S. Patton's jeep was already 3 miles away. And closing. To understand what happened at that checkpoint, you have to understand what Germany had become. The war in Europe was not yet over. But in this part of the country, it had simply stopped. The Wehrmacht had melted away. The SS had vanished into civilian clothes. What remained were the people no one had thought about for 6 years. Old men, mothers, widows, and children. So many children. They walked the roads in small groups, pulling carts that held everything they still owned. Sometimes the carts held bedding. Sometimes they held a younger sibling who could no longer walk. Sometimes they held nothing at all. And the children pulled them anyway, because letting go of the cart meant admitting it was over. The American soldiers arriving in these towns had been told very clearly what their orders were. Do not speak to civilians. Do not share food. Do not give chocolate, gum, cigarettes, or rations to German nationals. Do not smile at them. Do not smile at them. Do not touch their children. The policy had a name: non-fraternization. It had been written in clean offices, far from the smell of these roads. On paper, it made sense. These were the people whose sons had killed American boys at Bastogne, at Anzio, at the Hürtgen Forest. These were the people who had cheered or stayed silent while Europe burned. On paper, it made sense. On the road, it was almost impossible. Because the children did not know about the policy. The children only knew that the men in green uniforms had food, and that they themselves did not. Somewhere in that impossible space between the rule and the reality, a young corporal from Pennsylvania was about to make a decision that would cost him everything he thought he had, or so it seemed. His name was Daniel. He was 19 years old. He came from a dairy farm outside a town called Mifflinburg in central Pennsylvania, where the hills rolled gently and the air in autumn smelled of apples and wood smoke. He had 3 younger sisters. He had a mother who wrote to him every Sunday without fail, and a father who had served in the First War and had not spoken about it since. Daniel was quiet. The men in his unit liked him for it. He did not boast. He did not complain. He carried a small leather pouch in his jacket that held 2 photographs, one of his family standing in front of the barn, one of a girl named Ellen who had promised to wait for him. He shared his cigarettes. He shared his coffee. He gave away his extra socks more times than anyone could count. The men called him the deacon, though he was not religious exactly. He simply did not seem to know how to be unkind. In the inside pocket of his field jacket, Daniel had been carrying something for nearly 3 months, a Hershey bar. He had received it in a care package from his mother on his birthday in January. The chocolate had been frozen, then thawed, then frozen again. The wrapper was creased and soft from being touched too many times. He had refused to eat it. He had refused to share it. The men teased him about it. He only smiled. He was saving it. He had not told anyone why, but the men suspected. He was saving it for the first child he saw who looked the way his little sister had looked in his dreams since he had landed in France. She came out of the mist at 5:30 in the morning. The soldiers at the checkpoint had been awake for hours, drinking weak coffee, stamping their feet against the cold. They saw her before she saw them. A small figure moving along the ditch at the side of the road, the way a small animal moves when it does not want to be noticed. She stopped about 20 feet from the barrier. She did not ask for anything. She did not hold out her hand. She simply stood there, looking at the soldiers the way you look at weather you cannot control. Her coat was the color of wet ash. Her hair had been cut, recently and badly, probably by her mother, probably for lice. Her cheeks had the particular hollow that comes not from one missed meal, but from 100. Around her neck, on a piece of frayed string, hung a small wooden cross. Daniel saw her. He saw her, and something inside him, something that had been holding for 3 months, for 6 months, for 19 years, gave way. He stepped out from behind the sandbags. He walked toward her slowly, the way you approach a deer. He stopped a few feet away. He knelt down so he would not be tall. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The other soldiers watched without moving. They knew what was in that pocket. They had been waiting, in some quiet corner of themselves, for this moment for a long time. He brought out the chocolate bar. He held it out. The girl did not move at first. She looked at the chocolate. She looked at his face. She looked at the chocolate again. Then she took one small step forward, and then another, and then she was standing close enough that Daniel could see she was trembling. He placed the bar in her hands. He smiled, and then the sergeant's voice came across the cold air, low and flat and final. "Corporal, step away from her, right now." Sergeant Walter Briggs was 34 years old. He had been in the army for 12 of those years. He had landed in North Africa with the 1st Infantry Division in 1942. He had fought through Sicily, through Italy, through France. He wore the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and a Purple Heart with 2 clusters. In December, at a crossroads in Belgium, he had watched his closest friend, a man he had known since basic training, die in the snow from wounds Briggs could not stop with his own hands. He had not slept properly since. Briggs was not a cruel man. The soldiers who served under him would say this for the rest of their lives. He was a man who had decided, somewhere along the road between Sicily and Germany, that the only thing keeping any of them alive was the rules. Break the rules, and men died. Bend the rules, and men died. Mend the rules, and men died. Make exceptions, and men died. He had watched Daniel walk toward the girl. He had watched the chocolate bar appear. He had given the order without raising his voice. Arrest him. The 2 soldiers nearest to Daniel hesitated. Briggs looked at them. They moved. They walked to Daniel. They did not touch him roughly. One of them said quietly, "Come on, Danny." Daniel held out his wrists. There were no handcuffs at the checkpoint, so one of the men simply put a hand on his shoulder and turned him around. The girl had already run. She was halfway down the road, the chocolate bar pressed against her chest with both hands, the way you carry something that might break. The 20 soldiers stood in absolute silence. The chocolate wrapper, which had fallen from Daniel's hand when the order came, lay in the mud between them. No one picked it up. For a long moment, nothing happened. A bird called from somewhere in the broken trees. A piece of canvas flapped against a sandbag. A soldier coughed and looked away. One of the men, a private from Ohio named Hollis, whispered something under his breath that the others did not quite catch. Another man, older, only shook his head once, slowly. Sergeant Briggs stood with his hands on his hips, looking down the road where the girl had disappeared. He was about to speak. He was about to give the order to take Daniel back to the company command post. He was about to begin the paperwork that would end a 19-year-old's military career and possibly send him to a stockade for months. And then he stopped. Because something was moving on the road. Not one figure this time. Not 2. A column. A slow, ragged, silent column of children, walking in 2s and 3s, some holding hands, some carrying smaller children on their backs. They were coming from the direction the girl had run. 20 children. 30. 40. 50. They did not run. They walked, the way people walk when they are not sure they will be welcome, but have decided that hunger is worse than humiliation. The little girl was at the front. Her hand was empty now, but her face had changed. She had told them. Sergeant Briggs lowered his hands from his hips. His mouth opened slightly. He did not speak. Behind him, Daniel, still held loosely by two of his own friends, looked up the road and saw what was coming. He closed his eyes. It was at that exact moment that the sound of engines reached the checkpoint. 3 jeeps came around the bend in the road, kicking up a brown plume of dust against the morning sun. The lead jeep flew a small flag with 4 white stars. The soldiers at the checkpoint snapped to attention without being told. Even Briggs straightened. Even Daniel, with a hand still on his shoulder, came to a kind of attention. The convoy stopped about 15 yards from the barrier. General George S. Patton stepped out of the lead jeep. He was wearing his polished helmet and his tailored jacket. The ivory grip of his revolver caught the sun. His boots, somehow, were clean. He was 60 years old, and he moved like a man 20 years younger and 1,000 years more tired. He did not look at the soldiers first. He looked at the children. He stood very still for a long moment, taking them in. His jaw worked once. His eyes traveled along the column, from the small ones at the back to the little girl at the front who had stopped walking and was now staring up at him with her mouth slightly open, the way children stare at thunder. Then Patton turned his head. He saw the corporal being held by 2 men. He saw the sergeant standing rigid beside the sandbag wall. He saw the chocolate wrapper in the mud. He walked forward slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel, and he stopped in front of Sergeant Briggs. He did not raise his voice. When he finally spoke, it was so quiet that the soldiers 2 feet away had to lean in to hear him. "Sergeant, tell me what happened here." Briggs told him. He told him clearly, without excuses, without softening. He stated the policy. He stated the violation. He stated his order. He stood at attention the entire time. Patton listened without interrupting. When Briggs finished, the general was silent for what felt to the watching soldiers like a very long time. He looked down at the chocolate wrapper. He looked up at the column of children who had stopped moving and were now standing in the road, perhaps 30 yards away, watching. Then Patton turned to Daniel. "Corporal, step forward." The 2 men holding him let go. Daniel walked forward and stopped a respectful distance from the general. He saluted. His hand was steady. "What's your name, son?" "Corporal Daniel Hartman, sir." "Where are you from, Corporal Hartman?" "Mifflinburg, Pennsylvania, sir." Patton nodded once. He looked at Daniel for a long moment. "Was that your last chocolate bar?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes, sir." "Why did you give it to her?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked at the general. He looked at the road. He looked at the road. He looked at the little girl in the distance. "Sir," he said, "I have 3 sisters at home." That was all he said. Patton did not move for several seconds. Then he turned, very slowly, and looked at Sergeant Briggs again. His expression did not change. His voice did not rise. "Sergeant, your order was correct. By the regulation, it was correct." Briggs did not move, and it was wrong. The general turned to his aide, a young captain standing beside the jeep with a notebook in his hand. "Captain, take this down." The captain opened the notebook. Effective immediately, the checkpoint at this location is to serve as a distribution point for surplus rations to the civilian children of this town. Coordinate with the quartermaster. I want hot food on this road by tomorrow morning. Every morning. Until I say otherwise. The captain wrote without looking up. Patton turned back to Briggs. "Sergeant, you are not relieved. You are reassigned. You will run this operation. You will personally see to it that no child walks away from this checkpoint hungry. Is that understood?" Briggs's voice came out lower than usual. "Yes, sir. Look at me, Sergeant." Briggs looked at him. "You followed your orders. You did not fail. But I am giving you new orders now. And I am giving them to you because I think you, of all the men here, understand what it costs to enforce a rule. Which means you will understand what it costs to break one. Carry on." Then Patton turned to Daniel. "Corporal, the arrest is rescinded. Return to your post." Daniel saluted. He did not trust himself to speak. The general walked back toward his jeep. Halfway there, he stopped. He turned around. He looked once more at the column of children standing in the road. He removed his helmet. He held it against his chest for a moment. Then he put it back on, climbed into his jeep, and the convoy pulled away. By the next morning, there was a kitchen at the checkpoint. By the morning after, there was a line. The town learned about it before the army did. Mothers came first, hesitant, holding their children's hands too tightly. Then grandmothers. Then men, the few who had returned with their caps in their hands. They did not speak much English. The soldiers did not speak much German. None of it mattered. Within a week, small things began to appear at the checkpoint at dawn. A handful of dried apples wrapped in a cloth. A pair of mittens, hand-knitted, in a child's size, left on a sandbag with no note. Wildflowers in a tin can, placed on the barrier itself. The soldiers did not move them. Daniel went back to his duties. He did not talk about what had happened. When the men teased him about being the corporal who made Patton stop a war for breakfast, he only smiled in the way he always had. The little girl came back every morning. Her name, the soldiers eventually learned, was Annalise. She was 6. Her father had died on the Eastern Front. Her mother washed laundry for the American hospital that had opened in the next town over. Annalise would stand at the edge of the checkpoint, eat her bread quietly, and then walk to where Daniel was on duty and hold up her hand. He would hold up his. They never touched. They never spoke each other's language. It was enough. Daniel came home in the autumn of 1945. He married Ellen. He took over his father's dairy farm. He had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. He did not speak about the war. He did not march in parades. When the local paper asked him for an interview on the 40th anniversary of VE Day, he politely declined. When he died, in 2003, his oldest daughter went through the small wooden box he had kept on his nightstand for 58 years. Inside, behind a photograph of his mother, she found a Hershey bar wrapper. It had been folded carefully into a small square. The silver foil was almost gone. The brown paper was soft as cloth. Tucked inside the fold was a single sheet of stationery, dated 1947, written in Patton's hand and forwarded through the War Department 2 years before the general's death. It was a short letter. Only 3 lines were ever made public by the family. You did not break a regulation that morning, Corporal. You reminded a tired old soldier what the regulations were supposed to be for. I have thought of you often. GSP. In 2008, a German woman in her late 60s traveled to Pennsylvania. Her name was Annalise. She stood at Daniel's grave for a long time. She did not cry. She had passed crying decades ago. She placed a single object on the stone before she left. A Hershey bar, still wrapped. There are wars that are won with tanks, and there are wars that are won with bread. There are generals remembered for their thunder, and there are generals remembered by the few who knew them in quiet moments, for the way they removed their helmets on a dirt road in April when no one was supposed to be watching. There are young men who never know that the smallest thing they ever did, the thing they almost did not do, the thing that nearly cost them everything, was the thing that mattered most. Daniel Hartman gave away 1 chocolate bar. It fed 50 children that week, 500 children that month, a town for a year, a memory for a lifetime. And it reminded a sergeant who had stopped believing in mercy that mercy was the only thing worth enforcing. The war ended a few weeks later. The headlines went to other men, in other places, on other days. But somewhere in a small town in southern Germany, an old woman still keeps a folded silver wrapper in a wooden box. And somewhere in central Pennsylvania, a family still tells their children the story of the morning their grandfather knelt in the mud, and a general took off his helmet, and 20 soldiers learned that the strongest order ever given on that road was not the one that arrested a man, but the one that fed a child. If you had been one of those 20 soldiers standing at the checkpoint that morning, watching a friend arrested for an act of kindness, would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken up? Tell us in the comments. We read everyone.